The Secrets of Doctor Who is brought to you by the Star Quest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give. You're listening to The Secrets of Doctor Who, where we discuss everything about the hit BBC series, Doctor Who. And today we're discussing the fourth Doctor story, The Hand of Fear. I'm Dom Bettinelli, and joining me today on the panel are Jimmy Akin. Hi, Jimmy.
Eldrad must live.
And Father Cory Sticha. Hi, Father Cory.
Dom must live.
That's true. So remember to like The Secrets of Doctor Who on Facebook at facebook.com/Secrets of Doctor Who. Retweet us on Twitter, where we're at SQPN. And be sure to leave us comments wherever you find us. We love to talk to you. I want to tell you about another show on the network you are sure to enjoy called The Secrets of Technology. You can find that wherever fine podcasts are found or at sqpn.com/technology. Also, stick around to the end of the show because we have some really good feedback on our recent episode on the second Doctor, Fury from the Deep. But first, Jimmy, could you give us a recap of what happens in Hand of Fear?
Although we don't know it, we open on a scene occurring 150 million years ago. The planet Castria is executing a criminal named Eldrad who destroyed barriers protecting the planet from solar winds. With the barriers down, Castria is turning into an icy wasteland, so they've put Eldrad on a spaceship that they're going to blow up when a key moment arrives, guaranteeing that Eldrad will be completely destroyed. But the execution goes wrong, and the ship blows up prematurely. 150 million years later, the Doctor and Sarah Jane Smith discover Eldrad's hand in a quarry in England. Sarah is injured in an explosion in the quarry and is taken to the hospital. Since she touched the hand, she has fallen under its mental influence. Other people also fall under its mental influence, and the mind-controlled Sarah Jane takes the hand to a nuclear power station where the hand uses the radiation to begin regenerating. This leads to a crisis in which the hand causes the power plant's core to go critical, but it absorbs the energy and regenerates itself into a strange crystalline woman. To keep her from causing harm on Earth, the Doctor takes Eldrad back to Castria, but in modern times, not 150 million years ago. On Castria, Eldrad is critically injured by a booby trap, and the Doctor and Sarah Jane must take her to a regeneration chamber, which turns her into her true form, a crystalline man. It turns out that the Castrians are all dead. With the barriers down and the planet turning into an icy wasteland, they chose not to return to living underground, so they let themselves die. And since they knew Eldrad might return and want to conquer the galaxy, they booby-trapped the planet and destroyed the race bank that would have allowed them to come back. Via pre-recorded video, the former Castrian king taunts Eldrad and hails him as the King of Castria and the King of Nothing. The violent conqueror Eldrad wants the Doctor to take him off the planet, but the Doctor and Sarah cause him to fall into an abyss. Afterwards, Sarah is frustrated with the Doctor and is prepared to do a Tegan and threatens to leave the TARDIS. While she's out of the room, the Doctor receives a summons to Gallifrey and decides it's too dangerous to take her back there since he doesn't know what will happen. He thus leaves Sarah Jane on Earth. He believes he's leaving her on the same street as her home, but once she's back, Sarah concludes it likely isn't even the same city. The end.
Very good. All right, so this is the farewell to Sarah Jane, who has been with the Doctor for, 3 seasons at this point?
Something like that, yeah.
Well, she was around for a season of John Pertwee and for at least 2 seasons of Tom Baker. I forget if this is the third or fourth. I forget if this is the third or the fourth season of Tom Baker, but yeah, something like that.
Yeah, but I gather she's one of the most popular of all the companions. I mean,
she was before New Who. Sarah Jane was considered the most popular.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, of all the companions, yeah.
It sort of depends on when you came into the show. She's sort of among newer fans. she's the most popular of the ones they remembered, and they kind of idolized her. The older fans might have thought of Jamie.
Mhm.
Right.
And then the very late fans would have thought of Ace.
Right. Because the last companion in Classic Who. And because the one I always remembered, not having watched Classic Who until recently, was she was the only one I knew of was Sarah Jane Smith, and so that's kind of interesting to kind of see that. But yeah, I mean, she made a huge impact in her time.
Even among the mid Classic Who companions, though, I think Leela's better than Sarah Jane. I'd rather watch Leela than Sarah Jane.
Yeah. I mean, Leela is interesting in her because as a character, she's not an Earth woman from the 20th century.
Yeah. Also, it's more about personalities for me. Many of the Doctor's female companions had a reputation of being "quote unquote" screamers, as they were called. They were basically damsels in distress who got to scream, and there wasn't necessarily too much more than that. Although there really was, but this was the stereotype anyway. But Sarah Jane is more perky. She has a little more pepper in her personality than, say, Jo Grant did, or Carolyn did. So I think the early Third Doctor companions were what people were really thinking of that Sarah stood out against, and then Leela stood out even more.
Right.
And that's why I like Leela even more than I like Sarah Jane. But if you go back further into the black and white era, you have companions like Zoe, or Jamie, or other people who had complex relationships with the Doctor and would, like in Zoe's case, stand up to him and things like that. And Sarah Jane did more of that than Carolyn or Jo did.
Right. And when you had the first and second Doctor, who were more older men, they were less the leading man sort of guy, and so the younger male companions seemed to stand out a little bit more as action figures, whereas Tom Baker's more of an action figure.
Right. Yeah. Also, the fact he's younger, even though they didn't ever explore it during this era, there was more chemistry of a kind of suppressed romantic nature between Sarah Jane and Tom Baker than had existed between John Pertwee and any of his companions or any previous Doctor, because they were all older.
Was this the beginning of the whole Doctor is my boyfriend thoughts?
Yes, but on a suppressed level. They didn't openly talk about it, but it was clear that to the fans that there was some kind of chemistry going on with these characters.
Interesting.
There was very much fan fiction from that time that would have explored that, but nothing on screen, nothing canonical.
Yeah.
Right.
Until New Who, when they canonized the off-screen romantic relationship between the Fourth Doctor and Sarah.
Right, in the
school reunion.
School reunion, yeah. Where that was my first exposure to Sarah Jane, which is funny enough, given that I started with New Who. So we start this story, The Hand of Fear, and there's a hand that plays a prominent role, but it's kind of a funny thing to call it The Hand of Fear, and I'm not sure. It kind of fits for the first half or the first couple episodes, but not so much for the whole story.
No, the first couple episodes are really a riff on The Beast with Five Fingers, which was a 1946 movie about a severed hand that came to life and did stuff. Yes,
that's right. Or Cousin It from the Addams Family. So we have this world, the snowbound people wearing duvets, but apparently around themselves as clothing. We don't get to see them, which they hold back on showing us what the Eldrad's people look like, which I think is a nice dramatic device. And
they don't look like they're wearing those bulky crystal costumes under those robes, though.
No. They I kind of like this scene in the beginning. It's suitably dire and feels, like you don't really know exactly what's going on, but you can get a sense of, whoever this Eldrad person is, they must be really bad if you need to obliterate every particle of them to make sure that they can't come back. And so that's kind of an interesting aspect of that opening scene.
One of the things that I like a lot when they get to Earth and they're in the quarry, it's like, okay, we're in a quarry again. And for once, they're not trying to pass it off as an alien planet. It's a quarry. It's got workmen there. They're about to do blasting, and they actually did a blast from the show for the show. I wondered if this was stock footage, and it wasn't.
Oh,
They put a camera on the ground and blew up a cliffside. So you get this marvelous shot of all of this stuff. The cliff just disintegrates and falls on the camera, which they then had to dig up. But it's a really impressive shot, and I really like it.
I was thinking it had to happen eventually with all the quarries the TARDIS lands in. It had to land in one that explodes.
And Tom Baker, the Doctor even says a line about, how can I know all the quarries? And then the last happens.
Yeah, right. Although the improbability of surviving a getting buried by all that rubble with nary a scratch, a little bit, but at least when Sarah Jane got buried, at least they gave her a hand. Sorry. That's my last hand pun, so I won't do anymore.
Don't make promises you won't keep.
All future hand puns will be unintentional, I'm sure. So we have this scene in the hospital. So the Doctor and Sarah Jane had cut her off to the hospital. She's unconscious, and her hand is gripping the severed hand, which is like fossilized, so hard they can't get it out of her grip. And so in the emergency room, they have this funny ER doctor. It's kind of odd.
He played Musa in I, Claudius, the Greek physician.
Oh, okay. I mean, I was thinking there must be like that actor must have some, I don't know, some notoriety or some like he like stereotype or typecast. Mm-hmm. I don't know. He just had this funny mannerism.
He's played weird doctors before.
Okay. So he thinks that our doctor, the fourth Doctor, is an MD or medical doctor. And when the Doctor says he's from Gallifrey, the ER doc again thinks it's in Ireland, which is a recurring thing where people keep thinking Gallifrey's in Ireland. I guess it sounds Irish.
It sounds Irish, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So she meanwhile, once the Doctor gets kind of patched up, he goes to see Sarah Jane, and she's got this again. They're saying her hand and forearm are in contraction, like it's almost like if they were running an electrical current through muscles and they just are seized up, and that's kind of the way to think about it. They do manage to pry it out of her hand, although she holds onto the ring, and so it seems that she's conscious at some level.
Well, on some level, and it does have a ring, and the ring is going to be very important. We don't know it at this point, but the first thing the ring lets the wearer do is blast. Well, it mind controls them, but then it also it lets them blast people, and stun or kill them. And then we're also later going to find out it's got Eldrad's DNA in it, which is part of the regeneration process.
Right.
Yeah. And we have this fun scene where the Doctor goes to the pathology lab. He gets them to get a electron microscope so they can look at it. I didn't realize electron microscopes would be common enough that a hospital might have one in the mid 70s, but
probably wasn't
or 80s.
Yeah. Right. The time is flexible. And so it turns out that the hand is silicon based, so we get this idea that instead of carbon based life form, it's a silicon based life form.
And the reason people speculate on that is because elements that are in the same column of the periodic table have similar properties. That's why they use potassium chloride instead of sodium chloride as a salt substitute, because potassium and sodium are in the same column, so they taste kind of the same. In this case, carbon and silicon are in the same column on the periodic table, and so silicon has enough chemical properties like carbon that hypothetically you could build life around it, although there are actually a bunch of problems with that. And even in this episode, in this story, the Doctor notes that silicon life is very rare.
Right. Star Trek did an episode where they had a
Devil in the Dark.
Devil in the Dark, yep. An excellent one, one of my favorites. And they also reveal at this point that the hand was found in a 150 million year old rock stratum in the quarry. So, in other words, it had to have been buried 150 million years ago, which presents a problem to find a hand like that. But it's interesting that
it could just be a Silurian hand, but it's not.
Yeah.
It's interesting that the pathology doctor kind of accepts it pretty quickly. Like, he's not as skeptical as some would be. And the same thing happens with the coming up, the director of the nuclear power plant. Like, they accept these very strange alien things pretty quickly. They're not in as denial, like, which is kind of a cliche or trope that you find a lot in science fiction. The person who just denies the reality of the extremely strange thing in front of them.
Well, in the case of the nuclear power plant director, he's just had this person walk into an area where they should die from the radiation, and they're fine. And weird stuff is happening in the plant. So he's got a little more justification for being open to these ideas. In the case of the pathology lab guy, I assume he's just open-minded.
Yeah. So you mentioned the radiation. They realize the radiation causes the hand to get renewed or regenerate, and so Sarah, under the influence, goes to this nuclear power plant, which is in the story is a research and development nuclear power plant. It's not a active generating one, but they actually filmed at the Oldbury nuclear power plant in England. And according to TARDIS Wikia, the permission to film there was obtained before the script was even completed, because it just was so important that they filmed there. And they said they found the staff very accommodating on the initial visit. They were very enthusiastic about the project. The radiation of the power plant did provide some health and safety concerns, so they had Geiger counter checks being performed regularly and had to have radiological clearance certificates issued before any object could leave the premises. So that must have been a fascinating shoot at the power plant.
Yeah, no kidding.
And this was something that was a little bit common at the time on British television. They would occasionally need futuristic-looking industrial places to film. And so, like, there's also an episode of Blake 7 that was shot in a nuclear power plant. But I have in my notes, there's some really interesting shots of Sarah walking around in this big industrial spaces inside the power plant that are not normally something you would see on a TV budget, a children's television budget for this time, but they look nice.
Yes. Yeah. It really added to it. I mean, you could tell there were certain sets that were on a soundstage, and because they were filming, I almost feel like they filmed some on film and some on video, or maybe it was just the mixing. That was very common at the time.
Yeah, it was very much so. All the studio stuff was videotape, and anything outdoors or anything remote was on film.
Right. So you could see the differences. But yeah, the sets were very nice. I really think it added a lot to the story.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say the same thing. Sarah takes the hand in a box into a chamber that's like right outside the power generating core, and there's supposed to be enough radiation in this antechamber that it will kill a human in fairly short order. But it doesn't. Instead, the hand starts absorbing it. And we have this moment where the hand comes alive in the box and starts skittering around like it's a crab or something. And it's creepy and very well executed. I assume the way they did that is they have, someone's real hand is in a glove. And they've got a fake wrist and part of a forearm sticking up, but I assume the real wrist and forearm are hidden below as it starts to move around.
Right, with like probably green screen. They probably green screened it somehow, which for the time you usually could see something. They did a really good job of that.
I'm suspecting there's no green screen in this. I'd have to go back and review the shots, but I suspect they used a false floor, and the box is set on a false floor, and someone's real arm is sticking up through the floor into the glove.
Oh,
right,
that's possible.
Yeah, you can see a very clear point where Sarah Jane sets down the box, and then the scene shifts.
Okay.
You know, so there's a very clear transition there between her moving the box and then the box just sitting there on the floor.
Right. Yeah, the nice Tupperware box that she's got there.
Also, everybody who falls under the mental control of this is getting getting orders in their head. And what it's interesting, the voice shifts between male and female depending on who is getting the orders. So Sarah hears a female voice. The power plant and the doctor from the pathology lab, who also fall under its influence, they hear male voices. And I think it may be they're kind of whispering, so it's hard to tell. But I suspect it's the actor we're seeing on screen who's doing the mental voice. So I think it's Elizabeth Sladen doing the voice that Sarah Jane hears. But these voices give them instructions and say things like "Eldrad must live," and that's the catchphrase of all of the people who fall under its influence. They all out loud say "Eldrad must live," and which is a kind of dramatic statement coming out of nowhere.
Yeah. Okay, I agree. Eldrad must live. Although, speaking of must living, the Dr. Carter, that's the pathology lab scientist, and the power plant worker who both come out of the influence. Yeah, they both die. Sarah survives, obviously, but they both die. Carter falls to his death trying to stop the doctor.
I love the way it happens. He's following the doctor to the core, ostensibly to help, and then halfway there he's like, "Eldrad must live," and he swings a wrench at him as they're climbing up this big, metal staircase, and he defenestrates himself from the staircase. He misses with the wrench and falls over the side.
It was a big wrench. I mean, that would be a very heavy wrench if it were real. It was very clearly foam the way he picked it up and moved it around.
Yeah,
but and then Driscoll. So we have this dramatic scene where Driscoll, the power plant worker, carries the hand into the core, just like this is that opens the door, goes all the way, and this is where the fuel rods are. I mean, this is the really bad place. And the power plant director is convinced
they don't have blue glow coming out of the door. There should be blue glow from the Cherenkov radiation.
That's right. And the power plant director is like, the plant's going to explode. We have to evacuate. He's convinced he's going to die because there's a scene where he calls home to kind of say goodbye without saying it.
He's talking to his daughter, and he's like, and he's trying to be patient with his daughter who's telling him about stuff. But then it's like, could you put mommy on? And then he's like, "Oh, I just wanted to let you know I'm at the plant, and no, nothing's wrong, and I just wanted to say goodbye and kiss the children for me." And he's like saying goodbye and trying to cover up the fact this is the real goodbye in his mind.
Right.
It's touching. It's quite moving.
It is. It's very affecting in the context of this all action sci-fi thing that they put that in there.
He's also self-sacrificing himself because he's ordered everyone else in the plant to safe locations. He's ordered everyone else to evacuate, and he's staying here to deal with the situation.
Right. And so I think that the sequence is Driscoll takes the hand into the core where a nuclear reaction takes place. They expect it to explode, but it implodes, although the doctor keeps calling it an unexplosion. But essentially means it implodes, right?
Well, that was what I thought at first, but based on their description, I don't think they're. I don't know how coherent this writing is, because from the expression "unexplosion," you would expect it to be an implosion.
Yeah,
but that doesn't seem to be. It just there was a big radiation release, but it didn't explode,
right?
Because Eldrad absorbed it, and so I think that's all they mean by unexplosion, because an implosion would have caused destruction, and we don't see any evidence of destruction having occurred.
It was a pop, not a bang.
Right.
Basically, I mean, nothing happened. Nothing happened. All the radiation was absorbed, and the reactor shut down. Apart
from Driscoll being vaporized.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I think this is when the plant director calls in an airstrike, which would be a really bad idea, by the way. I mean, like if you have a nuclear blowing up and sending nuclear material flying everywhere into the atmosphere, that's a bad idea.
Well, and blowing it up with tactical nukes. They're doubling the nuclear explosion.
Yeah. There's also a great scene in here where the doctor, is concerned about everything that's been going on, and Sarah's been right at the middle of it, and he decides to telepathically, read her mind. And so he goes to touch her forehead on both sides with his hands. And she starts to object and says, "Not again. That's not fair." And then he's got her under.
Right.
And then, we have some additional stuff. The hand, I notice, keeps switching back and forth between being colored black and silver, which is an effects or prop error.
Mm-hmm.
But then they do decide, also at the moment of the explosion or the unexplosion, the doctor and Sarah have been running towards the core, and the doctor suddenly turns around and grabs Sarah and forces her to the ground so they both shelter because he knows the explosion is coming.
Mm-hmm.
And then it doesn't happen. And Sarah Jane and the doctor are laying on the ground, and they're waking up, and Sarah is like, "Are we dead?" And the doctor says, "No." "Are you sure?" "Yes."
Well, I like here where the doctor's trying to explain what happens, and he says, instead of going outwards and he moves his hands together, he says it went inwards and he moved his hands apart.
Right. So I'm looking at the transcript, and it does say that there, the plant director's name is Watson. He says that would have caused a nuclear explosion, and the doctor says it did, but fortunately it was absorbed. And he says fission took place, but instead of the explosion going outwards, it went inwards. So it was still it's weird.
I just think it's incoherent.
Yeah. So we call in the airstrike, but the airstrike gets absorbed, and
they just wanted an excuse for the RAF to use some of its stock footage.
Yeah, I know.
Also,
like F4 Phantoms.
I love how the director says that the strike is going to occur in 10 minutes. And I'm like, really? You just called the Home Office or whatever, and they approved a nuclear strike on British soil and it's so fast that they're going to have the plane scrambled and delivering the blast in 10 minutes? Did they just have plans, ready to go for nuking a British power plant?
Yeah, alert 5 with the nukes on board.
Well, don't you know on the console there, for the control room, it's got order a sandwich and nuke the plant. I mean, it's just one of the buttons on the console.
That's right.
It's really, really a safety. We're kidding, of course, but that would really be a bad safety feature at lunchtime.
Exactly.
After the non-explosion and the non-nuclear strike, the doctor and Sarah and Watson are in the by the core, and the door melts. That was kind of fun watching the door to the core melt apart, so that Eldrad walks out, and he has this interesting conversation where Eldrad is saying, "No, I'm not the bad guy. I was betrayed after I tried to save Castria," and so we're kind of left in this little questioning state. So who was the bad guy? Was it the Castrians, or is it Eldrad? Maybe Eldrad wasn't a bad guy.
Well, they're trying to generate doubt about that, and Eldrad is trying to come across as reasonable to the doctor. Yeah. I mean, it's pretty transparent to the viewer that this is our villain, but they're muddying the waters, and I like that. That's good, because villains don't see villains in the mirror. And dictators think they're doing good for people, and Eldrad thinks I was doing good for people and I was betrayed. So that's reasonable. I also really like the Eldrad costume. And they hang a lantern on the fact that it's not Eldrad's true form, because Eldrad looks in a mirror and she says, "What a strange form. I guess could this be the form of the creatures that found me?" And in fact, we later learn it is. She's appearing as this woman with, and to give you a sense of what this costume is like, it's gray, but it's got these crystals all over it. They look like, and if they're what they look like, that the costume or parts of it actually would have been pretty heavy, because there's sort of a gray leotard that the woman is wearing, but then on the leotard are things that look like polished magnets. You know, they look like polished magnetite. And so that would have actually been quite heavy, but it gives the costume a nice crystalline look while still giving her flexibility to move around with the leotards. And she's got this elongated head that projects up farther. It's meant to look crystalline, but it projects up farther than a human's head normally would. So it creates an abnormally long head, which again contributes to the alienness of this.
It kind of reminded me just a little bit of the Borg Queen in Star Trek. So
very similar.
Yeah,
very similar. At least the back of it does. Yeah,
only crystalline instead of biological or mechanical.
Yeah. She tells the doctor she demands that he help her because she apparently knows the Time Lords, because she says Time Lords are pledged to uphold the laws of time and prevent alien aggression that threatens the indigenous population, which is the first I've heard of this. Is this a thing that we've encountered before?
Well, they are pledged to non-intervention. Unless it threatens the local population is kind of a new thing in this episode.
Okay.
But the idea they're pledged to non-intervention has been around since the War Games, because that's the charge against the Doctor, is he's been meddling in the affairs of other planets.
Okay. And sort of Prime Directive almost.
Yeah. I want to go back though, because there is a nice bit where they're getting ready to go back to the power plant, which is when the Doctor first meets Eldrad.
Yep.
But they go back to the power plant after the attack, which has not damaged the power plant in any visible way, despite the fact it was hit allegedly with missiles. And the missiles should have done physical damage, and the nukes, when they went off, should have done physical damage, even if Eldrad then absorbed all their energy. But there's no damage at all, which is implausible. But when they all get back to the gate, the Doctor tells Sarah Jane to stay here at the gate with Professor Watson, the director, and he's going to go in and see what's up in the power plant by himself. And Sarah initially starts to go with the Doctor, but the Doctor says to stay. And Professor Watson says, "I think you better do what he says this time." And he says this time, apparently having some kind of knowledge that she doesn't always obey. And she says, "You're probably right, but I'm not going to." And she goes running after the Doctor. And Sarah Jane explains to the Doctor, it's like, I worry about you. And they have this little, I worry about each. They each say they worry about the other, and they decide they'll look out for each other.
Yep.
Also, after Eldrad notices that the Doctor, or identifies the Doctor as a Time Lord, which she does by scanning his mind in an extremely painful way.
Yeah.
It really hurts him when she scans his mind. She's not sure if she can trust him, and he crosses his heart, but because he has two hearts, he double crosses his hearts. And Tom Baker uses like a vertical stroke, and a big horizontal stroke. And Tom Baker uses that gesture on more than one occasion. Yeah.
I've seen other doctors later, I think, do it where it's like they do it with two hands, and that's funny. It does say in the script that he says that the Doctor asks Eldrad, "How did you prevent the missiles from exploding?" So,
and then she says she absorbed them.
Yeah, but it'd still be kinetic energy from them. You're right.
Yeah.
It's kind of an overlooked thing. So we end our time with the power plant around this point, and so the fourth episode, it's a 4-part story, and the fourth part will be on Castria. But I like how we end with the director, like he's back in this ruined power plant in the control room, and he's like realizes no one's going to believe any of this. Like I'm in so much trouble. So I thought that was pretty good. So the Doctor is going to take Eldrad in the TARDIS, and he, like you said, he refused to take her back in time to when she was first sent away,
Because that would undo the last 150 million years of Castrian history.
Right. And he doesn't want to mess with that. And I get the sense that he kind of knows why, like that if she went back, the Castrians might ruin everything. So we're not going to do that.
Yeah. Also, she's told him this lie about exactly what happened. Now, from her perspective, it's certain that she could believe that she was betrayed. But by the way, I like the fact that at this point the villain is a female. That's something you don't see too often, but we do see it here. But she's told the story that she's given is that there was a war between her Castrian species and an alien species, and it was the aliens, this is the lie, it was the aliens that caused the barriers protecting the planet from the solar winds to fail. And she then says the Castrian leaders were subverted by the alien leaders, and that's why they turned on her. But it was the leaders that turned on her, not the people. So she's portraying it as, I had the support of the Castrian people, but due to alien subversion, the leaders betrayed me, which is a complex and interesting story, and could almost be true. It just isn't.
Right. So they do get to the TARDIS, and they're still in that small wooden living room console room that they.
Yep. I love that room.
Yeah, the steampunk console room.
Let's get some style. And when Eldrad tries to do that mental thing again with the Doctor to probe his mind, he says, "Oh, you can't do that in here. We're in a state of multidimensional flux, a temporal grace." Because in the TARDIS, we don't exist, and so we can't hurt each other. That's new, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. He also says your weapons won't work in here. Mm-hmm. And this idea of the TARDIS being in a state of temporal grace is a concept that gets used occasionally, but is also clearly untrue, at least at times. Because in the Fifth Doctor's time, we've got Cybermen firing blasters in the control room.
Right. And the Doctor killing a Cyberman in the control room with a blaster.
Yeah. And they later deal with this. They could have dealt with it different ways. They could have said that there's some element in the TARDIS that creates the temporal grace, and then it's on the blink sometimes, or the Doctor removed it or turned it off or something. But they don't do that. Later, they hang a lantern on it, and I'm forgetting exactly when they did this, whether it was the Fifth Doctor or the 10th Doctor, and I'm forgetting, did I hear them do this in Big Finish or on screen? But at some point, it may have been the 11th Doctor. It was Matt Smith.
The 11th Doctor.
Yeah.
He kind of, basically it's just something he made up, or,
Yeah, it's in Let's Kill Hitler. It's after the young black Melody shoots a gun in the TARDIS control room, which is what forces them to land in 1930s Berlin. And as they're coming out of the TARDIS, which is like spewing steam or something, she says, "But you told me we were in a state of temporal grace and my weapons wouldn't work." And he says, "That was a clever lie."
Yeah.
That's where I heard it before. I knew that term temporal grace I'd heard before, but I didn't remember where. Of
course, and there's other times they take it seriously where weapons don't work in the TARDIS because of this. So I don't know if there's really, I'm sure someday they'll try to do something like, there's really just a circuit that disables guns that's kind of on the fritz once in a while.
Yeah. So they end up getting to Castria, which is a frozen wasteland still 150 million years later. Although I'm surprised to see that dome still standing after 150 million years. Pretty much anything will have decayed, but
it's
so
made of unobtainium.
Yes, they built them to last.
And then, of course, all the computer circuits work too,
Yes, that's right. So Eldrad's about to go into the elevator to go back down to the thing, and the door opens, and whiz thunk, message for you, sir. Right out of Monty Python.
Eldrad is shot in the chest with a spear that has a transparent container in it filled with Windex. And we're told that the Windex is actually an acid that she developed. So she knows there's no antidote to this acid, and what will happen is it will cause the crystalline structure of her body to shatter.
Mm-hmm.
So they've got to get her down to level 306, where she knows there's a regeneration chamber that they can hopefully use to keep her alive.
So as they're going down, you'll have to remind me, because this was a little confusing to me. There's a computer or somebody. It's probably a computer. Reading out. Heading to level 192. Alien intruders are there, and it seems like it's talking to King Rokon, but
Yes.
but he's not.
Right. Well, it's talking to King Rokon's body. And we only see Rokon, who was the original ruler 150 million years ago. We only see him from behind. And he's like sitting in a chair listening to this computer, and the computer is giving these readouts about we've detected one Castrian and 2 aliens. They're coming down. Please give orders to kill them, basically. And this figure is just sitting there silently and never gives the kill order.
Oh.
And it's because we're going to find out Rokon is dead, and this is just his corpse. There's some the edge is taken off of it because they don't look human, but there's some pretty serious corpse creepiness here. I mean, we've got King Rokon's dead body just sitting there, and eventually when they find it, it's going to get knocked on the ground and shattered. Also, the doctor, Sarah Jane, as they're walking through the dead city underground, Sarah Jane's like, why don't we see any bodies if they're all dead? And the doctor says, well, we're walking on them. They crumble to dust.
It's like, ew. So, and of course, there has to be an abyss because, all creepy underground passages have an abyss. And, but once
I know. The doctor says it's an abyss, and Sarah Jane says, and it's a long way down too. She almost just fell in it.
Yeah. So they do get to the regeneration chamber, and they think they've pulverized her because this big stone falls down and there's dust left when it comes back up.
There's a big cement slab, and Sarah Jane is just horrified by that body was just pulverized, and they think she's irretrievably gone.
She's like in an outline of like rock dust. But it turns out that Eldrad has regenerated as a dude. So the first cross-gender regeneration, although not a Time Lord, but anticipates the 12th to 13th.
Of course, this is his original form. This is what he looked like before. So he's just being restored.
And I like the line. There's a line in here where the doctor is noting that Eldrad has changed form, and he now says, "Oh, Doctor, as a Time Lord, you should be familiar with regeneration."
Yes.
It could be that this regeneration chamber, and it could be they even got the concept of regeneration or built this technology based on knowledge they had from the Time Lords, like Modwin's race in Modwin Undead. But the way the line is written, if I'm not mistaken, it could mean my true form, could mean species-wise, rather than I look identical to what I looked like before. It's like I look like I'm a member of the same species, because the male form, while it's clearly male, it even has like a crystal beard.
Yeah.
But the male form is distinctly different. It's much bulkier, and it does not have the extended cranium that the female form did. Instead, he's just got like a hexagonal crystal sitting on the top of his head.
Yep.
Whereas it was much more extended in the case of the female form. And so, and it's also male in appearance to human eyes. And it could be that all Castrians would appear male to human eyes. That could also be part of it. So I don't know if we're meant to understand that he looks identical, like the same individual member of this species. I think it's more like I look like we can harmonize these different elements by saying he looks like a member of his own species now, even if he looks different than what he originally did.
And this is about when we find out that Eldrad was lying to the doctor about alien invaders. There were no alien invaders. He's the bad guy. He's the one who was the usurper, the would-be conqueror of his planet and of the galaxy, and so on and so forth. And and like you said, it turns out the Castrian people destroyed themselves to prevent Eldrad from ever becoming king, which is an interesting tactic.
He also admits they thought they could destroy me, so I destroyed the barriers.
Right.
And in part, he wanted to conquer the galaxy, and they didn't want to conquer the galaxy, and so that's part of the alleged betrayal. It's really they just didn't want to go along with his galactic domination plans.
Mm. And then we have this recording of King Rokon, kind of, like you said, mocking him. Hail King Eldrad, King of Castria, King of Nothing, which reminded me a lot of the Ozymandias, the Keats poem. Look upon my works in despair, like you are now King of Nothing, of waste. So I thought that was a nice remote literary reference, and people might get it.
Initially, Eldrad is annoyed that he can't take personal vengeance on Rokon, but he gets over it pretty quickly because there's a race bank that he can use to reconstitute the entire race and then have fun conquering the galaxy. But when he goes into the race bank, it's empty, and he's like screaming about that. And the King Rokon recording explains that they decided not only to doom themselves but to clean out the race bank so they couldn't be reconstituted.
Right, they commit
race suicide,
yeah, which is amazing.
Dark. This is a pretty dark story in a bunch of ways.
Yes. And so in order to stop Eldrad, the Doctor and Sarah conspire to use the Doctor's scarf to trip Eldrad into the abyss.
This is hilarious. I mean, if this thing is made out of is silicon based, it's made out of stone. It's just going to rip through that scarf or rip it out of your hands. It's not going to trip over it.
Well, I mean, it's a Gallifreyan scarf. It could be. I mean, it's apparently something special.
I didn't know he got it on Earth. Mel, maybe he had it in the TARDIS. Yeah. Now that I think of it,
the Doctor
had it in the TARDIS, but I think he said he had gotten it from someone somewhere at some point.
Yeah. Right. The name of the real woman who made the TARDIS was Begonia Pope. And she had not, who made the scarf. And I mean, in the real world, her name was Begonia Pope. And they had not told her how long to make it. So she just knitted all the yarn they had that they had given her.
That's awesome. The Doctor does have a great line when they trip Eldrad into the abyss. He says, "The gravity of laws caught up with him."
Yeah.
Which is a nice turnaround. And then we have this, Sarah gets mad at the Doctor.
Kind of out of nowhere.
Yeah, and I kind of want to talk a little bit about that. Like, she storms off mad while he's getting a mental wave from Gallifrey. He's being recalled.
Well, okay, so in this scene, the first thing that's happening is he's repairing something in the console in the TARDIS room, and she's handing him tools. And he's naming imaginary sci-fi tools, and she's just handing them to him, which is actually shows how long they've been traveling together, that she would know the names of all these different sci-fi tools. And she's talking to him about her emotions, and he's focused on fixing the console, and she's getting madder and madder and says, like, out loud, "You're not even listening to me." And she gets to the point, and this, incidentally, this part of the episode was significantly scripted or improvised by Tom Baker and Elizabeth Sladen. They had kind of a draft of what they needed to have happen, but they thought that Baker and Sladen knew their characters so well that they could do this goodbye scene better than the writers themselves could. And so the exact dialogue they're using was come up with by Baker and Sladen. But she's getting more and more frustrated, and because he's not listening to her, she threatens to leave. And then he's like, fine, and still not realizing what she's saying. And so she's like, well, I guess I'll go pack my things. And she gets up and goes out of the room and to pack her stuff, and that's when he gets the telepathic summons.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I like it when she's talking about how she's tired of being mind controlled and savaged by bug-eyed monsters, which was a poke at Sidney Newman. Because of course, if you watch Adventure in Space and Time, the documentary or the fictionalized documentary, however you want to put it, about how Doctor Who was created. That's one thing he said. He did not want bug-eyed monsters, and of course, Daleks he saw as the ultimate evolution of bug-eyed monsters.
Right.
So that had to be a kind of a poke at him.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. In the specific dialogue in this scene, when the Doctor gets the telepathic message from Gallifrey, the summons, he says to himself, "I can't take Sarah to Gallifrey. I must get her back home." And this is when she's still out of the room. And that's logical because the last time he went to Gallifrey was at the end of the second Doctor's time, and they forced him to regenerate and abandoned his companions after blanking their memories of everything but their first adventure with him. And that's what he's wanting to protect Sarah from. He doesn't know what's going to happen to him. And he doesn't want her treated like Zoe and Jamie were, or worse. So he makes this decision on his own that he can't take her to Gallifrey. And then she comes back and he tells her, "I can't take you to Gallifrey. I've been summoned." And she's like, "Oh, come on. I can't miss Gallifrey. Hey, you're not." And then she says, "Hey, you're not going to regenerate again, are you?" Because that's what happened at the end of the second Doctor's time when he went to Gallifrey. So obviously he's told her the story of what happened at the end of War Games. And he says, "Not this time. I don't know what's going to happen." And so that's his explanation. And then he wants to put her down in South Croydon, which is a part of London, on Hillview Road, which is where she lives. And his final line to her is, "Till we meet again, Sarah." And that would be in School Reunion.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah, and they kind of retcon this in School Reunion because she confronts the 10th Doctor. "I thought you died. You abandoned me and all these things." And he basically says, "I couldn't take you to Gallifrey. I wasn't permitted. Humans were not permitted to go to Gallifrey."
Right.
And so they kind of retconned it a little bit of the reason why the 4th Doctor couldn't take her. Wasn't that he was afraid he was going to regenerate or that he was afraid for her life. It's he wasn't allowed to, which of course, this is the Doctor. The Time Lord rules are kind of at his plaything, shall we say. Yeah. He uses them as he needs to.
Also, rule number 1, the Doctor lies.
That's kind of a retcon too.
So the way I was looking at this, I was kind of annoyed, like, okay, so Sarah's going to leave because suddenly she gets mad at the Doctor and wants to go. Like they've done this with other companions, I think later, where
Tegan most notably.
Yeah, suddenly I'm angry and annoyed, and I'm leaving the TARDIS in this one episode. And whereas by adding in the whole thing about the summons to Gallifrey, it tempers that. Like, it's not quite that same thing. It is an external force. The Doctor doesn't really actually want her to go, and she doesn't really want to go. She's trying to get his attention, I think.
Yeah.
And so I kind of like the fact that they walk that back a little, and it's not just, oh, suddenly Sarah's mad and needs to go, because it wasn't a sudden departure for Elizabeth Sladen. She said at the end of this was like the second story of the 14th season. So she had said at the end of the 13th season she wanted to leave after at some point in the next season, and so this was planned. So I'm glad they did it the way they did.
Well, I was too. I was going to say, as a comedy stinger, she gets out and there's a golden retriever sitting on the sidewalk, and she's in a residential neighborhood, but she realizes it's not Hillview Road, and then she says it's probably not even South Croydon. And in School Reunion, she's going to confirm it was not South Croydon, it was Aberdeen.
Yeah.
Is Scotland? Is Aberdeen Scotland?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it wasn't even in England. Well, and according to the subtitles, she was whistling "Daddy Wouldn't Buy Me a Bow Wow" as she's walking away.
Uh-huh.
Oh.
And
by the way, that was a very tolerant dog as she's tapping it with the tennis racket. The dog's just kind of sitting there.
Yeah. She and there would be a revival attempt prior to I forget the exact year, but it was like in the 80s. It was going to be called Canine and Company, and it was about Sarah Jane and Canine. Now, Canine was introduced in Leela's time. So the way this works is this is the end of Elizabeth Sladen in The Hand of Fear. Then we go to Gallifrey for a single story with no companion, and then we pick up with Leela in The Face of Evil.
Yep.
And that's when Canine gets introduced. And so they made a pilot for an attempted spinoff series that starred Sarah Jane Smith on Earth with Canine. And so like the Doctor came back and gave her a canine, and they were going to have adventures together. They made the pilot. The pilot exists and you can watch it, but it didn't end up going to series.
And it was kind of a Christmas special too, because I remember our PBS station in North Dakota showed it at Christmas time once in a while. And I seem to recall, I mean, it's been a long time since I've seen it, but something like she mentions how the Doctor just left Canine on her doorstep. Basically, he didn't even say anything to her. He just left Canine on her doorstep and flew off.
Yeah.
Right.
Also, I've got down in my notes to where I have about the companion lengths. And so it depends who's the longest serving companion in Classic Who and in New Who, depends on how you measure it. In seasons, Elizabeth Sladen, Sarah Jane Smith is the longest. She served for more than 3 seasons. But Tegan is the longest if you measure in years. She served just under 3 years. And Jamie is the longest in number of episodes. So it depends on how you measure who's the longest serving companion. Also, Sarah didn't end up missing Gallifrey because for the 20th anniversary, we have the 5 Doctors, and she was transported to Gallifrey to be the 3rd Doctor's companion.
Yep.
Oh, and with Canine was there too. So that's where she meets Canine, right?
Well, she may have met Canine in the 5 Doctors, but that's unrelated to the. That's yeah.
Okay. Interesting. So that does it for this story. Before we move on to feedback, any final notes on The Hand of Fear, Father Cory?
Nothing. There's one scene where the Doctor has to carry Eldrad, who's the female form of Eldrad.
Yeah.
And I wrote down, it's a good thing Tom Baker did construction before he was the Doctor. Now, because it looked like it was the actual actress. It wasn't like a dummy.
It did. Yeah. It looked like the actual actress. I was looking for a cut to see if it could be a dummy, and I didn't see one.
Yeah, because I was looking too, like facial features and everything. Either they did a really good job on that dummy, or it was the actual actress, and it was moving too pliably, even as she was supposed to be completely frozen to be a dummy. So he actually picked up the actual actress, put her on his back, carried her into the room, and that's why I said, it's a good thing he did construction was actually fairly strong, at least would have been, because he had worked his construction before he was picked up as the Doctor.
Yeah. He carried her pretty readily. She must have been pretty light too. How about you, Jimmy? Any final thoughts?
Eldrad must live.
Okay. So our feedback this time comes from our last episode where we talked about Fury from the Deep, the 2nd Doctor story. And it was from R.O. on YouTube, who writes, "The surviving clip of Quill and Oak on the Lost in Time DVD always sparked my curiosity when I was younger. Truly one of the most disturbing memories I have of the show. An engaging story with a really great score. This is the one I'm holding out the biggest hope for turning up one day." I think R.O. is referring to the fact that, as we mentioned, Fury from the Deep doesn't exist as a, like a lot of 2nd Doctor stories, doesn't exist on tape, except for this one clip that they have.
Yeah, where you have Quill and Oak, who are 2 like maintenance men at the sea gas plant, and they're in front of a woman, and they have their mouths open, and they look like they're silently screaming. And it's very frightening and intimidating. We used a clip of the character Quill in the episode art for that episode. And so it's a very striking visual image. It makes for a very striking scene. What they're actually doing is exhaling the toxic gas that the seaweed makes to overcome the woman, who is Professor What's-His-Name's wife.
Do you guys have an episode or story that you're holding out hope for recovery someday? In some lost Kenyan television station with BBC reels in it.
Father, you?
I I can't really think of anything off the top of my head. There's a lot of them. There's now is the Gunslingers that one that's missing?
No, Gunslingers exists. I've seen it.
Okay. Oh, okay. That's a First Doctor episode. That's Wild West, so I didn't know if that one was available. Probably the one that's missing. We talked about recently, where there's the one missing episode that they had to reanimate. Web of Fear.
Web of Fear.
Dalek's
that was
Master.
the introduction. That was the introduction of the Brigadier.
Yeah. Yeah.
Dalek's Master Plan. I want the big 12-parter.
I kind of wish we had Marco Polo, the First Doctor story.
When they had a budget and all those costumes, because the clips look fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, we don't even have the audio of that, do we? I don't think
we do. We have the audio of everything.
Oh, okay. I don't think we actually discussed it. We need to go back and talk about that one then, because I think at the time that we were in that rotation, we weren't yet talking about just audio versions. So we need to make a note to go back and talk about Marco Polo then, because that would be worthwhile. Awesome. Well, thank you, RO, for that feedback. We really do appreciate that. We want to take a moment now to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create the Secrets of Doctor Who, including Helen G., David H., Sarah M., Greg T., and Margaret B. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue the Secrets of Doctor Who and all the shows at StarQuest. You can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. And we'd also like to thank Victor Lambs, who edited this episode. We'd love to hear what you think of the Fourth Doctor story, The Hand of Fear. You can let us know by commenting on the show at sqpn.com or the Secrets of Doctor Who Facebook page, or send an email to drwho@sqpn.com, or visit the StarQuest Discord community at sqpn.com/discord.
And by the way, I wanted to mention at the end of this episode, after Eldrad has fallen into the abyss, Sarah asks the Doctor, "Do you think Eldrad is dead?" And the Doctor says, "Oh, I doubt it. He's very tough, probably very hard to kill." That's an obvious setup for a return of Eldrad that they could use in the future. And perhaps in the new era of Doctor Who that's coming, we might have Eldrad return, because the new showrunner, Russell T Davies, is a big fan of classic Who and is bringing back other things. So we might get a return of Eldrad one day.
Very good. Interesting. So we'll be back next time when we'll be discussing the 12th Doctor story called Flatline. Until then, Father Cory Sticha, thank you for joining me and sharing the Secrets of Doctor Who.
Thank you, Dom.
Jimmy Akin, thank you as well.
Eldrad must die.
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to the Secrets of Doctor Who on StarQuest. Remember, no, Eldrad must live.